Prime. South Africa is in for another weekend of load shedding. Stage 4 power cuts will continue until 10 o'clock tonight and from then on reduced to stage 2. Now stage 2 load shedding will run until 7 a.m. tomorrow. Immediately after that, stage 4 kicks in until 10 p.m. leading to Sunday. For more on this back and forth by Eskom, I'm joined by Professor Swilling from the Center for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. We're right in the middle of stage 6 load shedding. It's been 4 consecutive days. Stage 8 power cuts are no longer a distant reality, but a real risk. How close are we?
Well, Eskom insists, and the Minister of Public Enterprises insists that we're a long way from stage 8, which would amount to a complete collapse of the grid, and it would take 5 days to re-establish. I'm not so sure. I think it's impossible for them to predict what's going to happen next, because the old power stations cannot really be fixed. And so you never know when they're going to trip over, and you never know when that'll happen in combination with sabotage or other forms of action that are intended to harm Eskom.
And with the risk then of South Africa just 2,000 megawatts away from stage 8 load shedding, although Eskom authorities insist that they're far away, and whether it happens or not, what will it depend on?
Well, that's the tricky thing. We are sitting on a knife edge, and we're not quite sure exactly what we can expect or what we can predict next. The management of Eskom have openly declared that they cannot predict exactly what is going to happen next, because any one of these old coal-fired power stations, especially under the strain during the course of winter, could trip over. And when you have a combination of these power stations tripping over, together with possibly sabotage, together possibly with illegal industrial action, you could end up at stage 8. I don't think it's possible to claim with any great confidence that that will never happen. I'm an academic, so I can tell you the bad news. Others can't.
And with the power utilities load shedding schedule ending at stage 8, is there a potential of higher stages, and what would that look like?
No, I mean, once we get to a point where the grid collapses, where no matter how much load shedding there is, you get to a point where you can't keep the grid going, then it will shut down, and you can't just switch it. You can't just switch it back on. It's not like a car where you go and get jumper leads and you kickstart it. You have to reconcile all the different frequencies, and it takes a lot of time to get all of that aligned. And that could take, as Eskom management has said, that could take 5 days. And if we're in the dark for 5 days, that really does mean none of us have electricity.
Does Eskom have the capacity to prevent a complete blackout at the moment?
Well, again, it goes to this real problem of uncertainty and unpredictability. What should have happened quite some time ago is these old coal-fired power stations, which are long past their closure date and therefore cannot really get fixed, they should have been closed down, and we should have had a whole pile of new generation capacity up and running on the grid. So we built Medupe, we built Kusile, but we didn't build them efficiently enough. So they are performing like relatively old power stations. They're not performing at the maximum like they should for a new power station. So what we actually need is a lot more generation capacity. And everybody loves to blame Eskom for the lights going off. But Eskom is not allowed to build new generation capacity, new power stations, new solar and wind farms. They're not allowed to. That's up to government. But everybody blames Eskom for not enough electricity on the grid.
Surely Eskom then should be escalating the conversation with government to allow for the new buildings and the new developments to take place.
Well, Eskom, I think, has done a lot in that regard. They've made very strong public statements. And they're continuously interacting with government in order to impress upon the government to deal with this issue. But there's an extraordinary amount of red tape. Minister of Public Enterprises 2 days ago at a press conference called it damn red tape and apologized for his poetry, and he even suggested at the end of the press interview that there's a discussion taking place about some kind of energy emergency. If that happened, then that in turn would empower the president to override some of the blockages and give responsibility to those who can get us to the end of load shedding in 2 years by building 10,000 megawatts of new generation capacity and 5,000 megawatts of storage, because that's what we need to end load shedding in 2 years.
Yes, because as far as I understand, the president on his way back from Botswana was already saying that he will have high-level conversations with Eskom executives and Minister Pravin Gordhan. Now, with the strike happening and the negotiations taking place, there was the assertion that perhaps Eskom is using the striking workers as a scapegoat and that we were, in all essence, going to get to the stage anyway. How big is the impact of the striking workers?
Well, the impact of the striking workers was massive and has contributed. It's not, you can't blame the strike for stage 6, but it's contributed, together with other factors, to the fact that there's quite a lot of power that is not available. So, quite a lot of generation capacity that's simply not available for the grid. But I don't think you can blame the strike for that. What the strike has done has revealed the underlying weakness, which we have had since 2008. Don't forget, we've had load shedding since 2008. That's a very long time. And still it has not been addressed. And we haven't had any new electricity onto the grid since 2015.
So what will happen as the striking workers return to their posts? I mean, they have already, some of them. Will the risk of acute power cuts be lowered as the staff return?
Obviously, it massively helps Eskom if their workforce comes back to work. And, as they said, in some cases, in some power stations, 90% of the workforce didn't come to work. Now that, even if that power station was operating 100% effectively, you just can't operate it. So that's going to help considerably when the full workforce is back. But there's high levels of demoralization in this workforce. It's not exactly the kind of workforce that is really going to go out and do its best. At the same time, you have this unpredictability that I referred to earlier. Yeah. Where you don't actually know what's going to happen next. And, imagine being Eskom management, where you wake up in the morning, you actually don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah. So in the end of it all, the end user, household, business is at a standstill and affected. Where should we be looking as consumers and business when it comes to a management that doesn't really know or have a sense of what will happen next? What are the alternatives?
Well, the best thing that households and businesses can do is purchase the necessary infrastructure to diminish dependence on the grid. So solar power in particular for rooftops on shopping malls, on factories, on households, that can work very effectively to make sure that you are far less dependent on the grid than you would otherwise be. And the regulatory framework is moving towards really empowering this. So I think that's what businesses and households should be thinking about. The prices of solar power for those kinds of installations has dropped dramatically. Over the last 10 years, it's dropped 90%. So, it's becoming increasingly affordable. So that could be the best option. For poorer houses, that's more difficult. So poorer houses can demand from their municipalities solar hot water geysers. And poorer houses should also be insisting on the cross-subsidization of solar rooftops.
Very well. Thank you so much for your